Hand over your luxury high-rise apartment as a wedding present, the voice of my father boomed through the microphone, echoing beneath the massive crystal chandeliers. 200 wealthy guests froze mid-toast while my mother smiled with eerie perfection. My sister Chloe blinked, feigning complete shock at the grand announcement. I stood frozen in the center of the room as every single eye burned directly into my soul. That was the exact moment a powerful stranger stood up quickly. Before I share the chaotic aftermath of that evening, I need to know if anyone out there understands this kind of isolation. I used to believe that keeping quiet was the only way to maintain stability within my household. If I smiled during social gatherings and nodded at the correct times, my family might eventually accept me. However, a fragile peace constructed on total compliance will always shatter when you least expect it. My parents cared only about public perception. My mother, Beatrice, viewed human relationships as decorative floral arrangements that required constant trimming and polishing for the world to admire. My father, Harrison, survived entirely on the applause of his wealthy business associates. Chloe was their ultimate pride and joy, the golden child who could never commit an error. I was merely the financial asset they refused to celebrate but desperately needed to sustain their lavish lifestyle. They constantly minimized my hard work because it lacked public glamour. Whenever acquaintances inquired about my profession, my mother would laugh dismissively and claim that Avery worked somewhere in basic office administration. She intentionally hid the fact that I served as the senior director of global corporate acquisitions, managing transactions worth tens of millions of dollars. To her, professional success meant absolutely nothing unless a wealthy husband accompanied the achievements. Chloe never had to earn any recognition because her superficial charm alone was always deemed completely sufficient by our manipulative parents. My younger sister would constantly refer to me as her dear older sibling whenever influential guests were listening nearby. It was merely a convenient prop designed to make her appear incredibly humble and sweet. I silently endured the manipulation for many years while quietly financing the hidden debts that kept our family reputation afloat. I cleared the massive mortgage when the latest business deal of my father collapsed entirely. I regularly wired funds to my mother for her sudden emergencies. I even transferred $50,000 to cover the catering costs for the wedding of Chloe without expecting a single thank you. They never questioned the origin of the money because they viewed my financial support as an absolute obligation. A week prior to the ceremony, Harrison cornered me in his private office. I laughed bitterly inside my quiet vehicle after that deeply insulting conversation. My parents truly had no understanding of what sacrifice meant. When I arrived at the grand rehearsal dinner, amber lights glowed softly over hundreds of pristine white roses. The entire venue was meticulously arranged for social media photographs. Beatrice spent hours adjusting the veil of Chloe while Harrison networked with potential investors near the entrance. I remained by the bar, completely unnoticed and totally invisible to them. Suddenly, Chloe approached me with a deeply manipulative smile plastered across her face. "Avery, I appreciate you helping us with the enormous wedding expenses," she announced loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear clearly. The word helping carried a sharp sting that aimed to diminish my actual contribution. Harrison nodded with approval because he loved public displays of gratitude that simultaneously made me appear small. I told myself to endure the final performance before escaping their toxic grasp forever. The morning of the wedding arrived with bright sunshine that made the entire world appear entirely innocent. Beneath the surface of the floral arrangements and chilled champagne, a dark tension filled the air. My intuition always sensed danger before my logical mind could process the reality. I walked into the grand hotel ballroom early, noting the suffocating scent of white lilies. The event staff rushed around frantically while the sharp voice of Beatrice demanded perfection from every decorator present. While observing the chaos, I noticed a strange gentleman standing completely motionless near the entrance. He wore an elegant charcoal suit paired with a striking silver necktie, maintaining a very deliberate and composed posture. His intense gaze locked onto mine, causing a sudden wave of anxiety to rush through my body. He offered a polite nod and murmured that I must remain incredibly vigilant regarding the announcements scheduled for this evening. He then dissolved into the crowded room immediately. A chilling sensation gripped my skin as I stood alone in the hallway. Suddenly, my mobile phone vibrated with a text message from an unidentified number. The cryptic message stated that they would attempt to seize my properties tonight and warned me not to surrender. Panic immediately filled my chest as I stared at the screen. I thought about my luxury high-rise apartment, the one sanctuary that belonged entirely to me through years of endless corporate work. I suddenly heard the muffled voices of my parents emanating from a nearby dressing room. I paused in the shadows to listen as Harrison explained his plan to make the grand announcement during the main toast. He claimed the surprise would render the wedding of Chloe absolutely unforgettable. Beatrice laughed softly and noted that Avery would never dare object in a room filled with cameras and influential witnesses. They intended to use my personal pride as a weapon tonight. Chloe asked if I would truly be comfortable with the arrangement, but Beatrice dismissed her concerns immediately. My mother stated that I did not require such a massive living space because I lived for my corporate work. She insisted that the newlyweds deserved the beautiful home far more than I did. The blood drained from my face as the harsh reality settled into my mind. They were actively plotting to steal my hard-earned property for a public display. Instead of confronting them immediately, I chose to remain completely silent and gather my thoughts. For the first time in my existence, I refused to react with emotional outbursts. I retreated to my private hotel suite and opened the secure lockbox containing my official real estate documents. I stared at the property deeds and corporate housing agreements that validated my sole ownership. My parents had contributed absolutely nothing to the acquisition of that luxury high-rise apartment. I instantly scanned the legal paperwork and transmitted everything to my corporate attorney. I instructed him to be completely prepared for a legal emergency at 8 o'clock inside the main ballroom. I then changed into a tailored navy dress that exuded absolute authority and strength. When I examined my reflection in the mirror, the submissive daughter was completely gone. In her place stood a resilient executive ready to defend her life work against the ultimate family betrayal. The magnificent ballroom was packed with wealthy guests when I descended the grand staircase. The sound of clinking crystal and elite gossip filled the air with an overwhelming sense of superficiality. I moved stealthily through the crowd while overhearing comments about the flawless family dynamic of the hosts. Chloe floated past me in her expensive silk gown, whispering that she was thrilled I could attend. I maintained a calm demeanor as Harrison signaled for everyone to take their seats. My stomach tightened with intense anticipation as I found a seat at a distant corner table. Harrison adjusted the stage microphone while pride radiated from his entire posture, with Beatrice standing smugly at his side. I lifted my glass of wine to conceal the faint smile spreading across my lips. If my treacherous family wanted to create a dramatic public spectacle, I would ensure they received an unforgettable performance that departed entirely from their rehearsed family script today. The sharp sound of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal glass resonated through the immense hall, silencing the remaining chatter. Harrison stood confidently at the center of the stage, his expensive cufflinks catching the light of the chandeliers. He began his speech by discussing the immense power of family unity and shared sacrifices. Chloe stood beside him looking like a pristine princess while Beatrice gazed at her with immense theatrical affection. I watched the unfolding trap with absolute calmness. The voice of my father deepened as he stated that the true strength of a family lies in total generosity. He announced to the 200 guests that his eldest daughter, Avery, had graciously decided to present her luxury high-rise apartment to the newlyweds. A sudden explosion of applause filled the room before I could even process the audacity of his statement. People cheered loudly while cameras flashed repeatedly to capture my supposed compliance before the large audience. I remained seated without moving a single muscle while the scent of celebration turned entirely bitter. Chloe covered her mouth with feigned astonishment while Beatrice beamed with absolute triumph from the stage. Harrison called out my name through the microphone, instructing me to join them upstairs and deliver a brief speech. 100 wealthy faces turned to stare directly at me, waiting for the expected submission. Instead, I calmly took another slow sip of my red wine today. The confident grin of my father began to falter as the silence stretched across the ballroom. Suddenly, the loud scrape of a chair echoed against the marble floor at the far side of the room. The elegant stranger with the silver tie stood up and projected his voice clearly across the hall. "Touch her corporate assets again and you will lose everything you own," he stated with absolute authority. The entire venue instantly froze in utter, complete disbelief. The stranger marched forward with deliberate steps, extracting a sleek business card from his tailored jacket. He introduced himself as Vance Sterling, the Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Financial Group. Whispers immediately erupted through the crowd as Harrison stumbled backward with visible recognition flashing across his pale face. Vance announced that his firm had partnered with me for years, and the property in question was a legally protected asset tied directly to my executive corporate contract details. Vance declared that the public announcement was a blatant attempt at illegal asset coercion, and the entire event was currently being live-streamed to 10,000 online viewers. Guests immediately looked toward a nearby table where a recording device displayed a glowing red light. Harrison attempted to laugh off the situation as a harmless family jest, but the expression of Vance remained entirely hardened. He explicitly labeled the actions of my parents as pure exploitation disguised as familial affection. The ballroom erupted into chaotic murmurs as several prominent business partners stood up in disgust. The primary investor, Mr. Patterson, loudly announced that he was withdrawing all capital from the firm of my father due to the clear lack of ethics. Other influential executives quickly joined the protest, publicly severing ties with Harrison right there on the spot. Chloe began to weep genuine tears of panic as the elaborate house of cards collapsed completely around them tonight. I stood up slowly as the surrounding noise faded into a distant hum. "You desired a grand public spectacle, and you finally received one," I stated with a perfectly level voice. Beatrice hissed that I was publicly humiliating the family name, but I replied that they had brought this destruction entirely upon themselves. Vance handed me my coat and gently guided me toward the exit while my mother sobbed hysterically behind us. The perfect wedding had transformed into total ruin. As the heavy doors closed behind us, I heard the distant sound of a glass shattering on the floor. The cool night air hit my face like absolute freedom. I looked up at the beautiful city skyline where the lights of my high-rise apartment glittered in the distance. Vance asked if I was feeling all right, and I responded that I was finally done apologizing for my existence. We stood together in the quiet night, bound by a sudden act of justice. By the following morning, the recorded footage had gone completely viral across every major social media platform. Millions of viewers witnessed the public exposure of my manipulative parents. The financial fallout was swift and devastating as the stock value of the family enterprise plummeted by half within 48 hours. The forced apology video of my father was universally mocked by the public. The family of the groom immediately called off the marriage, leaving Chloe entirely abandoned in the wreckage. I remained completely silent throughout the public scandal because the absolute truth had already delivered my vindication. When Vance officially offered me a senior seat on the executive board of Sterling Financial, I accepted the position with pride. I was no longer merely surviving the toxic manipulation of my relatives. I was actively constructing a brand new life built on respect and independence. The walls of my beautiful high-rise apartment now felt like an unyielding fortress of peace. Several weeks later, I stood by the massive windows overlooking the glowing city lights below. A framed photograph of my beloved grandmother sat on the shelf, featuring a note that urged me to never let anyone extinguish my inner light. I smiled deeply because I knew they had failed to break my spirit. If you have ever felt completely alone at a table filled with toxic individuals who claim to love you, remember that your true worth is undeniable.